Have you ever noticed that once in a while you are feeling really comfortable and familiar with a particular application, whether it's Word or Excel, and you start out on a project only to realize that something has happened that may be very quirky and something you weren't expecting at all? Once in a great while, you may run into this issue, and it's not the easiest to fix. So we're going to look at how to rearrange an Excel address list that you've probably inherited or somebody's volunteered and given you, and how to arrange that using Word, which actually winds up a little bit easier than trying to write a macro. I'm Terry, one of the consumer technology specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and let's look at those Excel lists, how we can convert them to text, open them in Word, make our fixes, and then pull them back into Excel so that they are useful files. As you start your new project, and this has something to do with Excel and using names and addresses in a list, you find that you are just excited to have someone volunteer to help you with typing all of the names. And so when you receive the workbook and you open it up, what you are anticipating is something that looks like this, where you have the names and sometimes even just first name and last name in two separate columns. You have the street in another column, city in another, state and zip separated into columns as well. And while this appears to be kind of a small list of only, about 10 people or so, this is only a sampling of what you may end up using. Let's say that we're anticipating, say, 1,000-person list. So if anything goes wrong with this list, yes, you could retype a 10-person list, but a 1,000-person list is going to be a little more challenging. And so you are just so excited thinking that this is the kind of list that you are going to get. But in fact, what happens is you receive a list that looks like this. Now, the person who typed it knew that you wanted to use Excel, and they did. And you wanted names and addresses, and they most certainly typed names and addresses. But somehow the communication broke down and they didn't realize, and maybe they don't use Excel a whole lot, so they went with how you would probably type these names and addresses in Word, for example. They've gone vertically down the worksheet. In one row, you have the first and last name. In the next row, you have the street address. And in the next row, you have the city, state, and zip all combined together. Well, again, 10 people, this might not be a huge deal. 1,000 people, this could be a real challenge for time. And how am I going to fix this? And I wish there were some way that we could write a formula that would magically fix this kind of a layout. We probably could write a macro that would work. But if you're not familiar with macros, then what you may decide to do is, of all things, use Word as your kind of translator to make this look like it should. Now, as we look at the information, I do want to make it clear that we don't have anyone here who has any kind of a title at the beginning of their name, so there's no Dr. or Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. or anything like that. There are also no middle initials that we might need to deal with. And there are no, I guess it's generational abbreviations at the end of a name. There are no juniors or seniors, or I suppose titles there too, for example, PhD. But once you know the basics of how to clean up this list, you'll be able to apply what you've learned and need to adjust for all of those extra kinds of things that may happen. We're going to take this list convert it to a text file, and we'll look at the possibilities of the text files and what that means. Eventually, we'll go to Word, which has an amazingly expanded find and replace ability. And then we're going to save that Word file as a text file again and bring it back into Excel so that we can use it, say, for a mail merge data source. The first thing that we need to do when we have this Excel file and we want to in some way get this file to Word so we can work with it, we need to convert it to a text file. And there are actually two text file type, I guess we'll say contenders. One is a CSV, a comma-separated values file. The other kind of text file has the file extension txt, and it is, when we choose the right kind of text file, a tab delimited file, meaning that where we see the column boundaries in Excel, in Word, we'll see tabs instead. And one of those file types works much better with what we're trying to do than the other. Let's look at both and then decide which is the best. So to start off, I'm going to go up to File, and then I'm going to come down to Save As, and I need to browse. I'm going to save this on my desktop, so I'll click on Desktop on the left here. I think I'm going to, instead of calling this address list original, I think we'll call it original 1. And then where it says Save as Type, instead of Excel Workbook, we're going to click the drop down and we're going to look for CSV. And there are several kinds here. There's CSV DOS, CSV Macintosh, but if I go up just a little bit, there is CSV comma delimited. And now that it says CSV comma delimited, we'll click Save. And when we do that, first of all, we want to look at our title bar, and it does say Address List Original 1, so we know that this is the correct file. But we're going to get this yellow bar that says some features might be lost. Now, the whole nature of a text file is that a lot of fancy things get kind of stripped away, so you truly just have text. What we can do is just say, I don't want to preserve it in Excel, so I'm not going to do a save as. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to go to the far right here, find that X to close that bar out. And then I'm going to, because really we've kind of saved this, we're going to, in the upper right, close. Now, looking at my desktop, I can already get a hint of what has happened when I saved as a CSV, because here's my address list original, and then here is the CSV file original 1. And notice that they both have an Excel icon. Well, let's look at original 1. I'm just going to double click on it to open it, and we're right back to Excel, even though, remember, Excel really isn't how we want to work with this file. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of Address List Original 1. And then I'm going to go back to my Address List Original, because I do want to keep a copy of everything that we've done here. But remember that we also have the option of tab delimited files. So let's go to File, Save As, and again, I'm going to browse here and make sure that I select my desktop. And we're going to give this a very original name. We're going to call this Address List Original 2. But this time, instead of Excel Workbook, I'm going to go to the far right, click the drop down, and I'm going to look for a text file. Now, just like we saw with the CSVs, if we go far enough in the list, we have text for DOS, text for Macintosh, but as we go up the list, we can eventually find text, tab delimited. So we're going to select that, and as it says text tab delimited, we are going to save to the desktop. And we are going to, once it is popped open, we still get the same messages here about how we have a text format now. And as you see in the yellow, we don't want to save it as Excel, so first of all, we'll go to the right and close out that message just for making it a little easier to see. Then I'm going to go to the top right and click the X to close that file. Now let's find it, and I'm going to need to move it down to the center here a little bit. You can tell right away that this original 2 is different. The icon is different, isn't it? When I double click on Address List Original 2, it opens that file in Notepad. So it is really looking at the kind of word processing side of things rather than the Excel and number side of things. The only thing is, while it opened very nicely in Notepad, if I go to Edit and I try to do anything very fancy here, you'll see that Find and Replace just don't have a lot of options. So we're not going to use Notepad for what we want to do, because remember, we want to pull all of these different entries that are now vertical, we want to make them horizontal instead. So I'm going to cancel, and then we're going to close out of Notepad and our original 2. Because a double click on the file that is saved on my desktop here opens it in Notepad, I need to think about how I can open this file and get it into Word. Well, maybe it's an obvious answer. What we need to do is come down to our Start button here, and then I have Word in my tiles, so I'm just going to click on it there to open Word. And then on the left, we're going to select Open and Browse. And I'm going to be sure to go to my desktop. And I am looking for a certain kind of file. Now, what happens is, down at the bottom, when I am searching with Word, it says file name, and then over at the right, chances are it's going to generally look for all files, or it's going to look for Word documents. But it's going to be relatively rare that it would default to, say, text files. So we need to, in this drop-down, look for text files. And it's quite a ways down here, a little bit more than half anyway, but select text files, and then it shows me on the desktop the different kinds of files that are text files. So from here, Address List Original 2, and I can click on it and then click Open, and it opens that file in Word. And we can see that it is very vertical, and this looks good in Word, doesn't it? Because this is kind of a format that Word would use. But we do have one issue here where we have the city, state, and zip. For some reason in the translation process, we now have quotes around those 3 fields. And as I scroll down, that's about the only thing that's really noticeable that I'm seeing. We may pick up other things as we go along. One other item of note, I have made sure that between the state and the zip, there are 2 spaces instead of only 1. Now that makes it much easier for us in our example today. I have found through working this kind of process before that if you have a lot of names and addresses, even if the final product is not going to be on legal paper, sometimes I will convert to legal paper because of just the amount of information that is there. I don't think we need to do that today. However, another nice trick in working with this kind of file is to go to Layout, in the tabs above the ribbon. And first of all, I think we'll go to Orientation and go to Landscape instead of Portrait. And then because of how the information lays out, we're also going to go to Margins and go to Narrow for now. With really large amounts of information, I've not only switched from letter to legal size paper, but I've also even changed those margins to as small as 1/4 of an inch, just to make sure that all of the data is fitting right and I can see what's going on. And so now that we have the basic page layout working, let's start and actually do some of the fixing that we need to do so we can pull this back into Excel. Let's first of all simply do a find and replace and remove the quotation marks around the city, state, and zip. So I'm going to go back to Home. And of course, we could use Control F for find, and then there's always a replace tab right next to it. Or if we go on this Home tab to the editing group, we can go directly to replace here as well. So we can click on replace. And what do we want to find? Well, we want to find a quote. What do we want to replace it with? And this is really interesting. If I put in a space using my space bar, then it would replace it with a space. But I don't want to replace it with anything. Because I have pulled down this text box, it will replace these quotes with nothing. So first of all, let's go kind of slow here. Let's do a find next, and it finds the very first quote and that very first name, and then I can replace. And as we see, there's no space in front of East. It just moved everything over where that quote was. As I go to the right, then it shows us the next quote. Now, if you know your information well enough, there's no reason to go to Find Next, Replace. Find Next, Replace. You can simply replace all, which is what we will do. And we've made a lot of replacements here. Well, 2 for each entry, and we'll click OK. And now as we look at our address list, you can see that those quotes are gone from every one of our entries. Well, the next thing that I think we need to do is to look at that comma that is separating the city and the state. And again, we want to find a character, in this case the comma. I think we want to replace the comma with a tab because we're really using a tab delimited file. The tab takes the place of the border between two columns. But how do I put in a tab? I can't type a tab and have it work. What I can do is come down to the bottom left of this window where it says More and click on it. And then down at the bottom, we have this whole Replace section where we can look for formats and replace them. So it's not only just fonts, but it's paragraphs and tabs and language and all sorts of things. But to the right of that, we also have Special. And when we click on Special, the second choice here is a tab character. Now let's take a second and look at this too, because look, we could add in Find and Replace in Word, paragraph marks, tab characters, section characters, column breaks, different kinds of dashes, manual line breaks, page breaks, all sorts of different kinds of things can be found and replaced by using these special characters. Well, we'll go with tab character. So now we're saying, though, that the comma between city and state is going to be replaced by a tab character. And this is the code, the symbol for the tab character. Let's look at Find Next and it started one off of the top, but that's okay. It's found that comma, and we can replace. And look at that. We have space now between the city and the state that wasn't there before, and it's going down to the next comma. In fact, let's replace all. And they made 9 replacements. Well, that's just about right since we have 10 people and their addresses. Now, it becomes a little difficult at this point to see what that extra space is all about. But fortunately, we have the Show Hide button. On the Home tab, in this paragraph group, which is the third group from the left, we can go to the paragraph mark kind of button that's called Show Hide. And when we click on Show Hide, it not only shows us the end of each line, which is that paragraph mark, but it shows us spaces if we have those with a little dot. And in this case, here is our first tab. It's an arrow pointing to the right. And so we now have that tab that separates the city and the state. We've taken off the quotes. Well, what else can we do here? What I would like to do is find those 2 spaces. Now, again, you have to know your data, because if there are 2 spaces anyplace else, then you would probably need to do the find next replace more manually than what we are going to do. But let's go back to find what. I'm going to delete the comma, and I'm going to press my space bar twice, but it's kind of hard to see. It just looks like invisible stuff. And we are going to replace that with a tab as well. Well, let's do the first one. Let's do a find next. And it has found those 2 dots for the 2 spaces, and we're going to trust that the rest of this works equally well. And so we're going to select replace all. And it's made 9 replacements, but we're far enough in the list now that it says, do you want to continue from the beginning? We'll say yes, and all done. As we look at this, and I'm going to close my find replace window here, we now have a tab between the city and the state, and another tab between the state and the zip. What I'd like to do next starts off as a little bit of a puzzle, because what I would like to do is take those paragraph marks at the end of each line and replace them with tabs as well, so I can really start getting those 3 lines of name and address going across for Excel. My only problem is that if I do that, when I come down to the end of a record, we have paragraph mark, then a space, and then a paragraph mark. If I do the single paragraph marks first, then when I get here, I'm going to do tab, space, tab. And that isn't what we want to do. What you can do is sometimes get a little tricky, and what we are going to do is first of all take that paragraph mark, space, paragraph, and substitute in a pipe, a symbol that is very rarely used and I know is not used within this particular list. So let's go back to replace. And what do we want to find? Well, we want to go down to special, because again, I can't type a paragraph mark, but I can go to special and select paragraph mark, press my space bar, and then another paragraph mark. And what do I want to replace it with? I want to find the pipe, which is on my keyboard. It's a shift, and then it's the key above my enter key. So I'm going to shift and make that a pipe, a straight line. Now let's see how it works. Let's go to find next. And so it has found paragraph mark, space, paragraph mark. When I replace, it's kind of bunched everything up, but if we look closely in here, we can now see that we have the first person's name in all of their information, and then just before the next person's name, we have that straight line, the pipe. Well, let's replace all. And do we want to continue searching from the beginning? Yeah. Well, now that we have the last of the record figured out, let's find one paragraph mark and replace it with a tab. So I'm going to come up to find what and just leave in one paragraph mark, take out that pipe, come down to special and replace it with a tab, and that tab is what is going to make our records go across. And then we'll do a first find and replace. So it found it down here in the middle of our list, which is fine, and we'll replace, and notice how now things are starting to go across, but we'll just do a replace all. It's done a lot of replacements. We want to start at the beginning and do even more, and we'll say OK. And I know this kind of looks like one big mess, but now we have that flow of the records to make them go horizontally across the page. So what we need to do is find our pipe and replace it with a paragraph mark. So we're kind of reversing what we did earlier. Let me pull this up a little bit, go to special, because paragraph mark is going to give us the end of our record. And let's replace all. Made 5 replacements. Let's see what we have. Oh, and then all done, we made 9. So let's see what we have. I'm going to close out of my Find Replace window. Now that we have our information pretty much horizontal instead of vertical, first of all, I see that address list has 2 tabs just because generally in typing we would press enter to go down one line, and then to have a blank line we would press enter a second time. So I'm going to click here in front of Ray Parker and move him down. Now from here I'm going to select all of the data, and then just so that I can see and make sure that the columns are going to line up, I'm going to go on the Home tab below Clipboard. I'm going to find the Tab button, which right now has an L on it showing that we're going to make left tabs. And so I'm going to add in a 2-inch tab, and then I'm going to add in a 5 1/4 inch tab and a 7-inch tab, and then we're just going to go with 7 1/2. Now, as I look at this, I see that this person here is a little bit off, and it looks like maybe there was an extra space between the first name and the last name, causing a tab in here. So I'm going to backspace so that the full name is all together. And then because I've done that, the street and the city and the state and the zip all line up. When I decide to save, I have 2 different options. One is to go to File and just Save. And it's going to show me that some of the features, because we're using plain text, may not quite work out right. And so it's just a general warning that we're not saving this as a Word file. And so we could save it by saying yes. Now what we're going to do is close out though and go back. So I'm going to cancel here. We're going to go back to File and Save As. We're going to save it as Address List Original 3. Make sure we have plain text, and then at the lower right, click on Save. And then we may get a question about the file conversion, but we'll just say OK, and we'll close out. From here, we'll go to Excel and kind of reverse what we've done in the past. So we'll go to Open, we'll browse. Now we'll go to our desktop and find the text file that we created. So in the lower right, instead of All Excel Files, we need to click on Text Files. And that gives us a nice list on my desktop of address list original 3, and we'll open it. Now at this point we get a 3-step text import wizard, which is used from time to time. It's a really great tool. And we have, first of all, delimited text because we used tabs. We could also use commas and several other different kinds of ways of separating our text out, but we'll say delimited. Be sure to go with My Data Has Headers if that's the case. We'll click Next. And then it's already picked up that we have a tab delimiter, but notice that we could also have used semicolons, commas, spaces. Spaces are a little tricky though. And then we get a data preview. Well, let's click on Next. And then we can go step by step through each column and define how that data is going to work. So we could say, well, it's just general. And so general converts numbers to numbers. It converts dates to dates and all other values to text, which it's going to cover a lot of different issues. Sometimes things that look like numbers are actually just text. For example, a zip code. You don't really do math on a zip code, so it is essentially text. And then you can define dates, or you can even decide not to import some of the information that's coming in. Well, we're just going to take the defaults and finish. And when we do, now we still get that message about we might have some lost data because we're bringing it into Excel. And I find that yellow bar kind of annoying. So we're going to go over to the far right and click on the X to turn that off. But all I'm going to do then is select all of those columns that have data in them, come over to the cells group, which is to the right of middle, select format, and then auto fit the column width. And look at that. Don't we have a beautiful horizontal address list? Now, the only thing is we want to be sure to do a file save as, and I may even browse here, and this we may call something like address list. Instead of original 3, we could even call it final. Now notice that it's defaulted to tab delimited text. So I want to come over to the drop down and save it as an Excel workbook. And then click Save. Oh my goodness, look at this. It looks like Excel. And when I close out and I look on my desktop, and let me bring it down so we can find it. Here is the address list final, and it has the Excel icon to it. When we double click it, then it opens right up, and this is what we were hoping for from the beginning. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, Learning Express Library, LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy Business. We also premiere videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel.